For all of the first year teachers listening, if you are struggling with classroom management, you are absolutely not alone. For me, it was the single most challenging part of my first year, and it almost ruined me. There were so many days where I felt completely defeated by not being able to run my classroom the way I know it needed to run.
Welcome to Rainbow Skies for New Teachers, where we're all about bite-sized tips and simple strategies for bright and busy new teachers.
If you're in your first few years of your career and want to make the rollercoaster ride of teaching more fun, streamlined and stress-free, you're in the right place.
We're Ashley and Alicia, the dynamic duo from Rainbow Sky Creations, and we're excited to be your teacher mentors on the go. There are rainbows ahead, my friend.
And together, we're unstoppable. Let's get into today's episode.
Rainbow Sky Creations acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Dharawal and Whadjuk Noongar people. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. Welcome to another episode of Rainbow Skies for New Teachers. I am so glad that you are here today. I have the pleasure of chatting to Jessica Werner. She is actually a doctor in what she does. She is a professor of education and she's a bit of a guru when it comes to classroom management and also understanding the neuroscience behind why we do what we do. And she is so passionate about helping schools support and retain effective teachers. Now, if you've just started out in education or have been in education for a while, you probably know that teachers leave. There's a bit of a 5-year shelf life, I remember the statistics saying. So she really wants to get out there globally, working as a consultant and working with schools to help them retain amazing educators. We're in a world now where there are more behaviour issues than we've ever seen. There are mental health issues. Teachers are finding it so hard at times to educate the students in their classroom, and she wants to empower educators with social and emotional learning, teach you about the best way to assist students with regulation and self-management, and she does this all with a holistic approach. When you listen to my chat today with Jessica, you're just going to hear, even just in her voice, how passionate and compassionate she is towards educators and the new kind of world that we're facing in education that was brought to light when we went through what happened during the pandemic. So I'm going to stop chatting. I am going to let you now listen to the lovely Jessica Werner as she shares her story of how she got into education, why she loves doing what she does, and also giving you some practical tips to support the students and yourself. So have a listen now to my chat with Jessica. Hello, Jessica, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
You're in for a treat today as we are going to talk to Jessica about proven strategies for mastering tough classrooms. Jessica, I'm sure as an educator, you have come across many tough classrooms in your time.
Yes, to say the least. I have had them, I have taught them, and I have the fortune of being able to help teachers work with them now. But yeah, one thing I'm seeing as time goes on is the classrooms are getting easier. That is for sure. I can say that with certainty.
Oh, well, that's really reassuring to hear, especially for our new teachers who are listening and entering the amazing career of education. Now, you've taught in several countries. We have two, a couple of countries here. Where have you taught and what are your biggest takeaways from teaching globally?
Yeah, it's really exciting to think about all the places I've been fortunate enough to teach. Let's see, started in Chile when I was still in college was my first teaching gig, middle school English. And then Honduras, I spent a year in Poland in an international school. And then I actually spent 10 years working in schools in Ethiopia and Kenya doing teacher professional development. So yeah, I just feel like I've had a lot of exposure and amazing perspective. But the biggest takeaways, this is such a good question. I feel like the more I travel and the more I see, and now our group, we work with schools around the world as well. So we're constantly in new schools, in new countries. And it's just interesting to see the universality of the joys and challenges that teachers face everywhere. One of the things I'm hearing about worldwide, and I saw it for myself, was the changing needs of students in the last 10 years, certainly in the last 2 years. And these are becoming even more obvious, I think, as we get further out from the pandemic. We're sifting through the rubble of what was left during the pandemic teaching years. So the changing student needs, it's growing everywhere. Student behaviors, classroom management, also thinking of it in terms of student regulation, not necessarily classroom management, but helping students regulate so that they feel ready to learn. And this is a really new way of thinking about things that hasn't really expanded worldwide yet, but everywhere I go, I'm trying to help teachers see the behaviors that the students are exhibiting are really communication. And it's how do we learn what they're trying to communicate with us? And then how do we help them regulate, and how do we co-regulate so that they can feel successful in the classroom? And then a big one, teacher well-being is such an issue universally. There are a lot of very tired, burnt out teachers everywhere. I hear this everywhere. I hear it from schools we work in the US, in the inner cities, to very wealthy international schools in the Middle East, to you name it. The teacher well-being and the feelings of overwhelm and workload and increasing student needs seems to be pretty consistent.
I could imagine that with the pandemic that had just happened. And I actually ended my teaching career at the start of the pandemic because my first baby was born in July 2020. So it was a very strange time. I've got pandemic babies. So it was a very strange time. But I feel like what the pandemic has done is brought so much to the forefront of how things weren't going well. And I think it opened up a door for us to start looking at education differently. Yes, we've done things a certain way for so long, but why have we been doing it? And how can it change? And I think it's reassuring to hear you talk about how changing needs, how about student regulation is becoming a concern, but also a priority of implementation into the classroom, of student well-being and teacher well-being. I feel like when I hear about student regulation that during my career, I was doing elements of it, but it wasn't called that. And I wasn't kind of tapping into it as effectively as what I could now based on the information that we have learned. But I love how with the global element of teaching, you shared how there are those similarities, that joy and that love of learning that you just see kids light up. And you're teaching, it has a ripple effect. It makes you light up when you see that you're making an impact. I found that when I was teaching overseas, that just the different culture and learning to understand the different culture, and being that you're tapping into schools in South America and Africa, and like the emphasis that different cultures place on education. Have you noticed a difference in South America and Europe with how the emphasis is on education and the respect or the importance of it?
Yes and no. I don't feel like I spent enough time in enough schools in each country to generalize necessarily. You know, I worked in one school or I worked in a few schools. But what I found, there's definitely different places in the world where the career gets more respect, they get higher pay, but also you hear about it in the interactions people have with the parents of the students they teach. There's definitely differences worldwide, and then culturally as well. In some cultures where I have worked, the parents are very much hand in hand working with the teachers, it's almost like they're co-partners in the students learning. Whereas in other areas, it can almost be hostile. We feel like we're pitted against each other. And so, you just feel it in different ways. But I'm so fortunate because all the schools I've worked in, no matter what they were, and I worked, in East Africa, I worked in government schools, I worked in local government schools. But again, you feel that love that the teachers have for the students, regardless, that love and that care. And the teachers in Ethiopia were putting in hours after school, just like the teachers in Germany and the US. You really feel like you're a part of something big and special. But when you're a teacher and your days are so long and so hard and you feel isolated and alone, I think it's easy to forget that. Really, I feel like we're so fortunate to be a part of schools and learning. Sometimes you forget that in the day-to-day because it can be really hard.
Yeah. I definitely know stepping away from the classroom, missing community element, like it definitely can fuel you. And it's really important for survival, feeling part of connection to others and community. So let's do a quick little pivot, links into what we've been chatting about. But can you share with us more about North Shore Learning and how it differs from the teacher education system? So your organisation, tell us about it.
Well, I started North Shore Learning about 5 years ago completely by accident. It was not my intention to be a business owner. I know a lot about education, but running a business has been a whole new thing for me. What I was being asked was to come into different schools where I was working with student teachers. At the time, I was also an adjunct professor of education at a local university, and I would go and observe my teachers doing practicum hours. And so they would get real-time observation and feedback from me. It's something a lot of us had when we were pre-service teachers, but then you lose it. When you start as a salaried teacher in most schools, you stop having people come in and observe you who aren't necessarily an in-house instructional coach or who aren't your administrator. But schools started asking if I could do the same thing for their teachers as I was doing for the student teachers who would come in and out of their buildings. And I thought this was a wonderful idea. I also was very surprised that it was something schools would invest in. Because as we all know, budgets are a major concern, but it was these principals who were approaching me early on who were very forward thinking and knowing that if they wanted to support and retain their best teachers, they needed to offer as many different ways to do that as possible. And so the business was born really as doing one-on-one in-person coaching with teachers, which was really geared in the beginning toward classroom management. So I was helping teachers manage their classroom, student behavior, and I should say this is pre-pandemic. Mm-hmm. So things have only intensified, but pre-pandemic as well. I mean, I learned this as a first-year teacher. For all of the first-year teachers listening, if you are struggling with classroom management, you are absolutely not alone. For me, it was the single most challenging part of my first year, and it almost ruined me. Like, there were so many days where I felt completely defeated by not being able to run my classroom the way I know it needed to run. It was very demoralizing. And I think, if I had somebody like the service we provide now, somebody who would come in, somebody who would offer support, somebody who would look at my students and hear about their individual needs and help me figure out what would work for them, it might have changed my whole initial years of teaching. And so as we've been continuing the work, and now we're hired by schools to do many different things. We do a lot of workshops, we do webinars. The one-on-one coaching is still the number one thing we're asked for, and people like it because it's so personalized. So one of the big complaints of PD is just, it's not tailored to meet everybody's needs. But when you have a coach sitting with you one-on-one, looking at your students and talking about specific learning objectives and behavior issues, it's as personalized as it gets. And so this is really popular. And what ended up happening, I didn't realize this was kind of the special part of it, but during the pandemic, I had previously trained as a life coach because I just find in my world, I'm the person people come to, and I get to hear a lot about people's lives. And a few years ago, I decided I should probably get some kind of formal training to make sure I was engaging in the correct way. But I found during the pandemic, when I would come in and work with teachers, here we're supposed to be talking about their teaching, which was it's just pandemic teaching. Hopefully we'll laugh at it one day, but how can we talk about teaching where there's so much stress that these poor teachers were living with? They were teaching hybrid and in-person and spaced out. And, there's just so many emotions that we would spend so much of our coaching just really talking about the teacher's own well-being. Yeah. And that's how I would start with, how are you? And often I would be the first one to have asked them that all week. How are you? And at the end of our sessions, the teachers set goals and we come up with steps and a timeline to achieve the instructional goals. But I also ask them to create goals around their own well-being and their wellness. And again, for teachers, this is actually tough because we're so used to giving, and teachers are great at it. I mean, they're great at giving everything to their students. But when they realized, when so many people were feeling close to burnout, that if they didn't do something for themselves, they weren't going to make it through the year, or they weren't going to be able to return next year. All of a sudden, people felt like they had permission, I think, to really consider their own well-being. And fortunately, this is a theme that has carried over post-pandemic. But it's the thing that we do that sets us apart, that just we're very holistic approach to personalized professional development with teachers.
And that is so refreshing. Love what you're doing at North Shore Learning, and it is so necessary. And I love how that out of the awfulness that was the pandemic, that the good thing to come out was to people to start checking in on themselves and on others. And I feel like there's a new phrase of like honoring your energy and honoring your time. That would have I never heard that when I was in the start of my career at all. Now, you shared that when you started out as a first year teacher, that classroom management was like a huge issue, not like, like an alarm. And I would agree with you. I would feel that when we talk to our community, the thing that keeps coming up is classroom management. How am I going to handle all these kids and behavior management? In this episode, we are going to delve now a bit more into the tough classrooms and strategies. Now, let's just have a look at what are some common disruptions or challenges that you're seeing teachers are facing in managing tough classrooms?
Well, managing tough classrooms, I'm thinking to all the schools I work in, and then to the classrooms that my own children are a part of. And I just kind of hear anecdotally what their own teachers are dealing with. So as I said earlier, regulation is just, it seems to be huge. And you had said that you were able to implement some strategies around regulation during your own teaching that at the time you didn't necessarily know were regulation strategies. And I would say if you were doing that, you were light years ahead of most of us, because none of us, nobody I know was trained on that in teacher ed. It really comes from a psychology, occupational therapy, neuroscience lens that we did not get. And so when I talk to teachers about regulation and they say, oh, I feel like I should have known this, there's no reason why you would have, because we weren't trained on it. But I think now we're starting to see that management is understanding the communication behind the student behaviors. And often we're seeing this communication is excessive. It looks like many things. It can look extreme, like tantrums. It can go the complete opposite way and look like disengagement. And both of those are signs of dysregulation. It can look like fights. I'm hearing about more physical altercations in all schools. Again, we're not just talking the schools you historically think, oh, they probably have a lot of classroom management. This is everywhere. And all ages, starting with pre-K. So a lot of our work actually is with the little ones. So this general dysregulation, which is now what we know that it is. Let's see, executive function skills are something I hear about over and over. Just perhaps the surprise around the lack of executive functioning skills that we assume the students of different ages have when they come into the classroom. And again, this spans from pre-K actually all the way through college. We have some college professors on our North Shore team who say that they are seeing the same thing in their college students. So really this gap in executive functioning, and it can make you feel like if you're unable to manage your time, if you're unable to practice task initiation, it can make you feel really frustrated. And then that could come out as being a behavior. So definitely hearing a lot about executive function, student regulation, and then just generally shorter attention spans. I'm hearing this everywhere I go. The kids, their attention spans have shrunk, and they actually have. So what we know about the brain has told us that, yeah, the brain has actually changed. And just based on the world that the kids live in today and what they're exposed to, their attention spans and their ability to sit and listen quietly on the carpet, crisscross applesauce, is not what it was a few years ago. So when we talk about classroom management, we're often talking about student engagement at the same time, because the engaged, active, interested students are exhibiting less behaviors and less behavior-based communication. But I really am seeing these two things kind of go hand in hand right now.
Yeah. And I think that's a nice umbrella that you've covered it under, because if you delve into disengagement, that can look different. And if you delve into the fighting, and that can look different. But I think touching on those and like definitely that element of executive function, I can't remember how much I spent like last 5 years of being like on persistence, on problem solving. I'm really just talking about that executive function and trying to incorporate it into your lessons. Or like students were always doing it, but you're making it teachable and noticeable of this is what you're doing right now and this is how we can become a better problem solver and so forth. So we've identified these are what the disruptions can look like. And this discussion that we're having now could go on for days and weeks and months. So we're just
True.
scraping the iceberg today. But can you share some of, it could be one or two, of the most effective classroom management techniques that you've used or observed? And I know North Shore is all about inclusivity. So with these techniques you're going to share, also considering that they're respectful and supportive of all students to the best of our ability.
Right. The number one thing, always number one, is just to invest in your relationship with your students and to invest in their relationship as a class, because relationships are just foundational and they're critical for learning and for growing. And we have a lot to get through during the school day. There's a lot of boxes to check. So sometimes people will say, well, I don't have time. I don't have time to check in with all my students, or I don't have time. But what I tell people is engaging in relationship building with your students, it comes back 100-fold. So always, when in doubt, lean in with engagement.
I'm going to add to that, Jessica, on top of that first one you've shared, because that is the first thing we always tell our new teachers in our membership, that you don't have time not to invest in your relationships. So taking that time out in the first week of school, the first couple of weeks at school, and if you're partway through the term year and you start to see the wheels falling off, I can tell you right then and there, check in on your relationships, slow down the pace and check in with your students. So I love it that we're on the same page with that one.
Well, I should say too, the relationships, this is all ages. As they get older, it doesn't mean that you ease out. You still want to lean into relationships, even with your 12th graders. So I oftentimes in secondary schools, this is something I don't see happening as often as it could be. So it rings true for all ages. Also, especially, and this is counterintuitive. So the students that are the most challenging are actually the ones you should be leaning into the most with relationships. And like I said, it's counterintuitive because you don't want to. It's really difficult, especially when a student absorbs a lot of your time and energy. But again, leaning in, learning about that student, finding about their likes and dislikes. What are they interested in? What makes them tick? You showing them that you care and you're interested. It's positive attention. And, often kids will take any kind of attention, but the positive attention. And especially, like I said, if you're having a moment where you think, I don't want anything to do with this child, that's probably the best time to ask them a question about their favorite soccer team or what they did this weekend. Not only will you learn about them, it might also give you information onto what is going on, what is causing them to feel disrupted or distracted. So I think relationships are definitely where I would start. Also, one of the things I've been learning more about just in my free time, but because of my work in schools and everywhere I go, I think we are learning so much about the neuroscience of learning and the neuroscience of behavior. And what I love about teaching and learning about the brain is that it is very explanatory. So when we understand the way the brain works, especially when we've lived through trauma or stress, it helps us to understand what we are experiencing with our students, and it helps create empathy. So again, thinking of that student who is really challenging you right now, if you think about it, is right now his brain, he's feeling flooded or overloaded. It helps you remember to find that place of empathy. So all of our trainings are grounded in neuroscience because we find that people really enjoy knowing the why behind what they're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can guarantee that the most challenging students that you have and you spend that time with the relationships will be that kid that you remember years later and probably become one of your favorite students. So there is no time wasted in investing in relationships. So let's continue on this chat about strategies. What would be a quick social emotional regulation learning strategy teachers can use to foster a more positive classroom environment?
Okay, this one is going to sound very simple, but I don't see it often enough. I highly recommend greeting every student by name on their way into your classroom every day. What it does is it sends the message immediately. I'm here, I see you, and you're safe in my classroom. Again, it just seems really simple, but we know that creating these psychologically safe spaces for kids impacts their own well-being and their ability to learn. And just taking that minute to greet everybody at the door, I've seen it over and over how far it goes. And so some of the secondary teachers are listening saying, well, I have 7 classes. Do you want me to greet 7 classes? And I say, yes. do it as often as you can, because again, even the older students, they're being seen, they know they're seen, they know they're safe. They know that you know their name at the very least. I mean, honestly, for some kids, that is really important. So yeah, really quick and easy. But if you're going to try one thing tomorrow, I would say, especially if you have a tough class, even better if you have a tough class, show up tomorrow and greet every student by name as they walk in. And even if you can do this as well, say, I'm happy to have you here. I'm happy to have you here. It just really sets the stage for a great day together.
I would completely agree. I feel like I heard somewhere where that element of greeting a student, but them also seeing your face, how your facial expression is and your reaction to interacting with them and using that personalization of their name is so powerful. And especially even for our early year teachers or actually any teacher, kids can read the facade. They can read the mask. So if you've got that element of authenticity of being like, yeah, I'm so glad to see you, Jessica, like, welcome to the classroom today. Already I'd be like, yeah, all right, cool, let's go. Let's do this.
Well, it's funny because this is one of my strategies, but even personally, so I'm in a new city this week and I started attending yoga yesterday. And it was my first day in a new studio and I was greeted with, hello, Jessica, nice to meet you. And I was so touched. Here I am, I'm a full grown adult, but I'm so pleased to hear my name and to be welcomed. So yeah, it just goes to show these things matter.
Yes, I've always seemed to have worked in schools where the kids don't line up to come in, like they just drip feed through the morning. And I used to just try and make it conscious of my desk. If I was working at my desk or wherever I was, that it was facing the classroom. If I saw that flutter of someone walking in, I'd be like, hey, Liam, how's it going? You always have those kids who may be having a bit of a day or a bit of a morning and they kind of sidle in and like sneakily go and set up their space. And you have to be like, oh, I have to go find this kid, and go hunt down the class and just make sure that I would touch base with every student before the day started. And if that meant the bell had gone and I still hadn't said g'day to everyone, I would be like, no biggie, and would just kind of go around. We used to do assembly in the morning. And sometimes my toughest days where I'm huddling all the kids to get to assembly and kids are like running in from across the oval. And by the time we got back to the classroom after 40 minutes or so, you could feel there was this element of dysregulation and that we would have to find time to regroup back together as a class. And I'm talking like my year 4 students as well. I'd be like, come on, guys, let's get together. How's your morning? And it's so effective, that strategy that you have shared. And I think it's not until you kind of say it's a simple but effective one that when you reflect back on it, you go, oh yeah, it really is. So make sure you say hello, look people in the eyes.
Even as you say that about assemblies, I think it makes sense that they're coming back in with this kind of frantic energy, because by the time you see them, they've already had these 3 major transitions. They've gotten to school, they've gone to assembly, and now they're going to the classroom from the assembly. Absolutely, it makes sense. And then again, just to like put forth the 5 minutes or the time to help everybody regroup. Absolutely.
Yeah, in all honesty, there wasn't any serious learning. Maybe there was a reason we put assemblies on a Friday. A Friday, to be honest, a Friday afternoon would have been even better. But I know the teacher who would have had to do the assembly item that day would be pretty nervous until the end of the day. Now, you talk about inclusivity, and I think the more that we talk about neuroscience, how our brains work, I think we're learning to understand that there are a lot of diverse student needs in the classroom. And I think as well, a lot of diverse needs with our educators. I think when you're talking about your life coach training and that the first thing that you're doing when you're doing those one-on-one coaches and talking to teachers and checking in with how they are, that becomes a big part of your mentoring process. If we've got teachers now who have diverse needs in the classroom, what's one takeaway we could give them to let them know that it's okay and they're not alone?
Well, if you are a teacher and you are seeing a lot of diverse needs in your classroom, this is the norm. And this is the norm today and steadily increasing. So as we talk about, the things we're talking about, engagement, motivation, understanding regulation, there is an urgency to be expanding the way we teach and the way we interact with kids, because we're learning every day how diverse and how neurodiverse our students are. And we're learning, like you said, a lot of us as adults are learning, oh, you know what? That intense focus I always had, that could have been ADHD. And I think because we're learning so many things in real time about the brain, it's a great opportunity to really pause and think, okay, I know I learn differently because we all do. So how might the student need things to be different? And then, as you said earlier, when you were talking about executive function, sharing that with the students as well. Modeling, right now, one of the things I'm working on is task initiation. And sometimes I have a hard time getting started. Does anybody else ever feel this way? And just showing the students that it's okay. My brain works differently, your brains work differently, and we're going to figure out what you need to be successful. And we're learning that this is going to look absolutely different for every single child. We've talked about adaptive teaching for years. We've talked about differentiation. It is no longer an option. In my opinion, it is our reality. So just learning as much as you can. And again, that's why it's nice to have the outside support to say, here are some things you can try. Or here's a great online PD you can go to learn about these learners you have in your class. Different ways. Actually, I think that's one of the good things that came out of the pandemic is all of a sudden PD became really globalized as well. You can take a training in another country. You can be coached by people in other countries. We work with people all over, and you can reach out and get the support you need. Teachers who are working with neurodiverse students, this community is growing, and they're extremely supportive and they're looking to connect. And so there's just a lot of opportunity to learn more from other people. But just know you're not alone. I can promise. I can't think of a single classroom where somebody on my team works where there's not an element of neurodiversity. It might not be diagnosed, and honestly, it's probably not usually, but it's there, and it's just helping us adapt our own practices as well.
And I think you saying that if you're looking at investing in relationships, taking that time to make sure students are feeling seen, heard, and valued, and as well checking into your empathy muscle, it's going to help with all students with any type of need as like kind of a blanket rule. Like, how are my relationships going? Have I checked in with them? And am I using my empathy muscle? Is probably like a good little check for you to see if you're on the right track, if things are going awry. Now, let's wrap this amazing chat. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you, Jessica. Look, we could go pretty deep with this question. If you had a magic wand and you could make one change in education, what would it be?
Such a good question. It was really hard to pick one thing. I wish everybody in the world appreciated how amazing teachers are. I wish they received the recognition and appreciation they deserve. And I know some countries in some areas do this better than others, but I'm going to be happy one day if teachers get the same kind of welcome and pay as our pro athletes or as our celebrities, because I think what they do is so important. Everybody can credit something in their life to a teacher. I feel like they deserve a lot more respect and a lot more appreciation. So that's what I would do. I would change that so that all the teachers are viewed as being the rock stars I think they are.
I love that. Here, preach it, sister. Now, how can our listeners connect with you, Jessica, after this interview?
Our company is North Shore Learning, and you can find us at our website, northshorelearning.org. We are also on Facebook and Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as Dr. Jessica Werner. And for listeners, if you go to jessicawernerwellbeing.com/teachers, I am sending anybody who is interested some of our favorite tips and tricks about quick little well-being hacks you can insert into your teaching day.
Oh, I love it. We're going to link all those in the show notes. So if you haven't got a pen or paper close to you, you can just click on the link and get in touch with Jessica. Because, hey, I don't think you can have too many well-being tips. So very generous of you to share that with anyone and teachers who need it a lot.
I call them micro well-being because they can be done in 1 minute or in 30 minutes, but they're just like little ways to help you get through the day when it's a tough day.
I'm going to be checking in and having a look at these micro well-beings. Jessica, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. And I feel like this won't be the first time that we'll be talking, that there will be many more chats to come because you have so much to share. And I feel it just resonates so much with our community. So thank you again, Jessica.
Thank you. I've been so honored to be a guest.
I hope you enjoyed that chat as much as I did with Jessica. I feel like we were just scraping the surface. in talking about social and emotional needs of teachers and students and how we can empower educators to deal with the diverse needs in the classroom. If you haven't yet started greeting your students in the morning and making eye contact and using your students' names every day when they walk into the classroom or start a lesson, start doing it. Make it your little experiment for next week and see how at the end of the week, how things might have shifted in your classroom. If that sense of belonging has increased or your ability to communicate with students that you haven't so easily been able to do has changed, hopefully for the positive. And if you would love to connect with Jessica, get on board and have a listen to her micro wellbeing hacks, because I don't think you can really necessarily have too many, but you can get exposed to a lot and you'll find that there's going to be a couple that really resonate with you because not everything fits everyone. So find what works for you and try to make it a daily practice into your life for you to be the best version of yourself. So until next week, there are rainbows ahead, my friend, and together we're unstoppable.